I hadn't believed a word of it when my nephew assured me he would be getting honors in his final year at Oxford, all due to 2 pills. After spending 80% of his time there in the pub or some girl's bed, the randy fool would need a mountain of drugs to get a first in astrophysics. And even then, only if he could sell that pill mountain for enough money to bribe someone into giving him a pass. "Rubbish," I offered in my role as a supportive uncle. "Cobblers! Pull the other leg. It's got bells on. Mind my nonsense when you do, though." Sean laughed as he always did at my weird sayings. Then he smiled. "I knew that would be your reaction, Uncle D. That's why I brought a couple for you to try." "Oh, please," I scoffed. My name was Daniel, but the nieces and nephew had shortened it. I liked it. Salt and sugar pills are not magical. Then why not try them? The effects last just over 2 days as far as I can tell, and Aunt Alice and Mum will be away for the weekend. Perfect time to sample some actual brain power. I looked at him suspiciously. "Did you just call me stupid?" He laughed again. "Hey, if the cap fits, wear it. Even if the cap has a big D on it. For Uncle D, of course." "Sure it is. Now you call me a dunce. Your Christmas wishes are floating out the window, Sean. Wave them goodbye." He held his hand out. The pills on his palm were very ordinary. One looked like an aspirin substitute, and the other had a shiny yellow coating. It looked like a Pez. "Sweets? You're trying to con me with sweets?" "If they're just sweets, then take them," he replied. I took them hesitantly. I knew it was a joke, but... "Sean, I hope you're not trying to get me high. I don't want to think I can fly or talk to mushrooms from Mars. That crap you guys see when you take drugs. Why would you do that?" "I don't do drugs, Uncle D. That would wipe me out of university so quickly." He shrugged. "Look, I took these a couple of times and studied hard. You wouldn't believe how much you can take in and retain, and that was important to me. If I took something that made me more brainy, that would be nice. However, I admit I haven't studied nearly enough to get the info, so that's why being able to improve my memory works out so well." "More brainy? That's a low bar to set," I replied. He gave me another of those wry grins and ignored the dig. When someone whispered about it, I knew it was a remote chance, but it was all I had. And it worked. I will get that first and the trip to Japan. Dad is probably going to be angry about offering that to me as an incentive. "Well, if you do it, I think Alan will be happy enough. A first from Manchester is nothing to sneeze at. He'll be unbearable going around bragging and crowing nonstop if you do." He hugged me. "Take them, Uncle D. You'll thank me." His words were utterly wrong and wholly right, both at the same time. When he left, I spent half an hour trying to match up the pills on the internet. In the end, one seemed to be a weight loss concoction, a shiny appetite suppressant tablet that had poor reviews from dieters. The other was a drug to suppress arthritis, which bothered me a little more. But there was only one, and Dad took 5 at a time every week for his bad knees. His were a different make, but they were the same strength, so one tablet didn't seem to be wildly dangerous. Alice wouldn't be home for the weekend, so it was just me closing up the house for the night. As I got my customary glass of water, I spotted the pills on the kitchen counter and impulsively swept them up and popped them into my mouth. Apart from waking up to a long, drawn-out burp, followed closely by an enormous fart that left me feeling like a deflated balloon and forced me to open the window, I felt okay. So I went back to sleep. In the morning, my first thought when I awoke was, well, I made it through the night. That thought pops up now and again as fellows my age keel over with heart attacks and is put to bed with a shovel. I decided to take another online look at those pills' ingredients and side effects, just in case I had to call poison's control. The 2-hour session I spent on the net was interesting. I started on the PC then, when the paging seemed so slow. Despite the high-speed internet access I had for gaming, I opened up the internet app on my phone. Finally, I fetched my wife's tablet as well, scanning all 3 screens almost simultaneously. My reading rate was incredible. From my research on that subject, it turns out that reading speed is limited only by how quickly the brain can process an image. After all, when you see a page, everything is there in front of you as a picture, every single word clear. But you still move from word to word and read on only when your brain sends a signal that it has processed and stored the information. That's why speed readers sometimes go faster than their brains can manage and have to reread a section. It's also why we can get so completely lost in a story. When that happens, the brain works incredibly hard to interpret the information and send it to a mental image run by the imagination, which doesn't leave enough power to process peripheral distractions properly. I read alternately from the PC, phone, and tablet as if each glance was a frame in a movie reel. My fingers worked like I was sending Morse code, and each frame froze in my mind. I went from reading about chemical compounds to researching how various compounds and molecules reacted with each other in different circumstances. When I stopped after an hour, I was exhausted and starving. I worked out how the pills acted during a very substantial full English breakfast. My appetite effectively demonstrated why the diet pill wasn't popular. The arthritis drug lowered autoimmunity slightly, as arthritis can be caused by an immune reaction to the body repairing itself. That opened the channel for the antidepressants in the diet pill to activate and stimulate the sections of the brain related to sight and processing images and memory. Sean had been right. It was all true. I took a nap for an hour, woke up fresh, and went back on the net, wandering as the will took me. I went from reading the history of my town to the geography of India, from local events to historical castles, basic economics to the rules of the stock market, and so much in between. A massive lunch got me researching to understand my appetite, and I realized my brain was burning calories by the bucketful. However, food was relatively cheap, and with time available limited to 2 days, minutes were the real expense. I took several cuts out of the freezer to defrost. Halfway through the afternoon, my phone pinged several times. I reluctantly checked it and found a couple of messages from Alice. She and Rhoda had pooled their money to buy an antique side table they hoped to resell for a good profit, but had wiped out their budget in the process, so they would be just wandering around window shopping until the following night's train home. A picture was attached. A small brown table with thin, overworked legs and a couple of drawers tucked away under the top. It looked antique. It also looked ugly as hell. It certainly looked out of place in the hotel room the two of them sharing, which appeared to be furnished with standard, cheap-as-we-can-get hotel furniture that looked worn and tatty. More interesting was the 19th century town clock seen through the window and what looked like Morris dancers in the square in front of it. Ah, well. At least they would have some entertainment, although I doubted that Morris dancing, men dressed as yokels with bells on their legs dancing in circles and seemingly threatening each other with sticks, could be classed as entertainment. I snickered to myself. As far as I could tell, they had yet to profit more than 5% on anything they bought, but they really loved antiquing, and the two of them spent a weekend every couple of months buying that and trying to resell it as treasure. I didn't mind. It gave me a weekend free of husband jobs, and the two of them were always excited and happy with the possibility that they might discover a lost Chippendale or Hepplewhite. Shaking my head fondly at my wife's eternal hope, I researched her antique table. I could flick through pages online in seconds and remember each one. I found a match and discovered it was likely worth around £20, a 1970s knockoff of a cheap French style. An antique shop in another town was selling an identical one for $30, including delivery costs. The sisters-in-law would be taking a significant loss on this one. I sighed. The two of them loved their treasure hunting, but it seemed to cost way more than it brought in, and the trash they couldn't sell always ended up gracing our house. Then I brightened up. Making a mistake like that meant that Alice would soon try and make it up to me with plenty of love, which was always a good thing. She'd be a little quiet and depressed for a while, but then start to try and coax money out of me for their next weekend. Hell, I didn't mind too much. She could have taken up girls' nights out, and that I would have objected to, which would, in turn, have made for an unhappy wife. Antiquing with the sister-in-law was about as dangerous as a night at a bingo hall. I didn't mind subsidizing her hobby to an extent and told her so from the start. But as she and Rhoda drove to and from the hundreds of tiny villages to see if they had any decent shops, I ended up with a massive fuel bill. When I objected, they worked out it would be cheaper for them to share a room at one of the inns in an area and use that as a base. One night became 2 every 3 months, and the pair of them were like happy hens with a clutch of chicks. Alan, my brother, was a bit of a tightwad and had moaned for a while, but Rhoda had seemingly made it worth it somehow, as he smiled a whole lot more and stopped grumbling about having to share costs. Of course, I couldn't guess how she made him that way. Right. This gamble would cost the pair of them their weekend's £400 budget for the dubious pleasure of window shopping and Morris dancing. I shook my head and laughed again. I considered what to research next. If Sean was right, I had an evening and a day, and I didn't want to waste it. At the same time, my brain felt a little heavy, a little full. In the end, I grabbed my coat off the coat rack and went for a walk. It was a cold, fresh day, and I was glad for the coat, repaying its warmth by distractedly throwing it back on the coat rack when I got home again. As always, it fell to the floor as soon as I let go. This always annoyed me because, as a coat rack, it made a fine brick. The hooks were too short, and coats always fell to the floor unless hung carefully. I remembered seeing something very similar in my earlier search and wondered how much Alice could get for it if I put my foot down and insisted she get rid of it. Maybe she'd make a profit on this piece, which would be nice. Weirdly, when I got to the computer and started looking at more pictures of antiques, I couldn't really remember any details of the coat rack. I went back, stared at it for a while, and then returned to my desk to try again. Nothing. I was devastated that the pills had worn off so quickly. I loved this self-education exercise, and the thought that I'd wasted so much of it by sleeping and eating left me disappointed. I took a picture of the coat rack on my phone, deciding to prop it next to the monitor as a reference. But once I looked at the picture, I found that it was suddenly clear in my memory. Puzzled, I went and found a piece from their last weekend, an oversized mug with a picture of the royal wedding on it. Like I said, low-quality tat. I turned my back and couldn't remember much detail apart from the faces. I used the phone camera and looked at the result, and that image also became crystal clear in my mind. Interesting. It seemed that pictures and scenes from real life were processed differently, or different brain parts handled the two. The medication hadn't prematurely worn off after all. Back at the PC, I looked at images of coat racks, the pages flickering past to a tap on the mouse. There were 3 photos of the one in question from 3 different shops, so the chances of it being a rare antique were so far beyond low that shark mess would be sky high. My brain made a connection. One of the shops on the Google Images page advertising the coat rack was the same one hawking Alice's side table. I shook my head. There's a sucker born every minute, and that shop obviously knew it. I looked at the picture of the mug. This time, the scroll wheel on the mouse almost heated up as I span it, the page of thumbnails continually flowing upwards. There was the cup. And lo, there was the name of a shop supplying it. 3 things bought by the adventurous entrepreneurs were all available from the same shop. Taylor Antiques in Harlington. Once is interesting, twice is a coincidence, and thrice is worth investigating. If the women were visiting different areas each weekend away looking for rare and unique items, surely the chances of buying 3 things also available from one shop were pretty remote. And if their purchases were available everywhere, they must have recognized that they couldn't make a profit. I went hunting through the house for other things my wife hadn't yet managed to palm off onto some other sucker. Within minutes, I photographed a jewelry box that played a tune while a ballerina rotated whenever the lid was lifted, a brass snuff box with a decent pattern etched into the top, and a supposedly Victorian tailor's dummy that now graced our spare room. The jewelry box turned out to be so common that I could have bought 3 within 5 kilometers of my house, while the other 2 were not quite so common. But all 3 were advertised on the website of Taylor Antiques. It was distinctly odd because the shop was in Harlington in Bedfordshire, and the hotel the women had booked was outside Ashford in Kent, where there was a plethora of antique shops. The two weren't that far apart, 100 miles or so, but the whole of Greater London was between them. Something was distinctly fishy. I decided to let my brain mull over things in the background while thinking about something completely different. I closed the internet search and booted up WOW to tank for a while. I wanted to see whether I could play better with these pills. Sadly, I couldn't. I knew the keys and buttons to press, knew where to move my character, even when and how the boss would be most vulnerable. But my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Bugger. My newborn dreams of playing in the professional gaming leagues crisped and turned to ash. Ah, well. Back to the puzzle. Google Maps was the next stop. Harlington wasn't big by any means. Not really much more than a hamlet with grandiose visions of becoming a village. The pictures from that page showed a dreary little cluster of houses, pubs, and shops, although the clock tower on the small village hall was unique. The picture didn't show its face, but there was enough detail to identify it as the same one in the picture Alika and Rhoda had sent me. So why the hell would they be there? There was something about the name of the village, a nagging something that my old standard memory recognized but refused to detail. After trying various things to poke my old, slow brain, I finally checked the phone prefix online and found hundreds of pages of names listed within that phone area. With a sigh, I started clicking. Luckily, it didn't take long to process them. When I reached it, I was almost sure I knew what was going on when one name suddenly seemed to jump out. Talbot, C. Mr. 1472 Sundon Road, Harlington, 809-476. Talbot, Chris Talbot, him or his brother Callum. The Talbot twins, better known as the Tosspot twins when we were still at school, were would-be hard cases. They were low-level, low-class jerks who had bullied their way through life, even challenging my brother and me by trying to take our girlfriends in our penultimate year at school. They were 2 years older than Alan and 3 older than me, but were a year behind me in school, having spent a couple of years in a reformatory. Alan and I hadn't backed down, and the showdown had taken place behind the bike sheds. As always happened when a fight secretly took place at school, the area was packed with an over-enthusiastic audience. The Tosspots were treating it like some sort of championship fight and seemed to be copying Rocky Balboa, shadowboxing while running around in little circles. Michael and I just watched them from the other end of the open area in the center of the crowd. We'd worked out a plan, and acting like 5-year-olds on a sugar rush wasn't part of it. The 2 girls at the heart of this mess were amongst a gaggle of girls to one side in the neutral area between the 2 factions, which was disappointing. It would have been a little more encouraging to know that they, at least, were supporting our side. Now the twins were big, with hard homegrown muscles pumped up by years of forced labor on their stepfather's farm. So when they attacked, we wisely cheated and pulled out the cricket bats we'd hidden in a bush, and after we'd scored a few boundaries, they no longer wanted to fight. I was no brain box. I sold telecom equipment, mainly to government departments who already knew precisely what they wanted. Effectively, all they really needed was someone to hold their hands while they signed the contracts after winning and dining them, which didn't take much brain power. No, I wasn't an intellectual, but I could take a good guess at what was going on here. The pattern was pretty straightforward. I thought for a while and then phoned my brother. After some discussion, Alan agreed with my conclusions. Our wives were cheating on us with the Talbots and had been for a couple of years. I didn't tell him about Sean's pills. He didn't need anything more to worry about. Besides, I was the cool uncle, and I was never going to shop my nephew for giving me something as cool as an eidetic memory, the perfect recall of an image after seeing it for just a fraction of a second. I snorted at that thought. I hadn't even known the word eidetic when I started my research that morning. My older brother was livid. My feelings puzzled me, however. I was angry at Alice for her cheating, especially for regularly shacking up with the tosspots who were so beneath her in class and quality, but I wasn't raging. I was hurt, but not devastated. And I felt profound disappointment in her choices, but not despair. All of which I had presumed would be the raging emotions I'd feel if the situation ever occurred. Perhaps the magic medicine damped down emotions. In this case, maybe I needed to let things process in my brain once again. I didn't feel like online gaming again, and the rain had stopped, so I wandered down to the shops and bought a pint of milk instead. I found myself staring at the shelves of beer and really wanted a liter or two of Newcastle's best brown ale. But I also didn't want to take any chances of mucking up the effect of the pills. Sadly, I went home to a cup of tea and a few chocolate digestives to dip in it, lost in my thoughts. Eventually, I went back to the computer and lost myself in page after page of French vocabulary. I had no idea whether it would work, but I was bad at languages and had always wanted to visit somewhere and speak to the people in their native tongue. After half an hour, I realized that I needed to study phonetic symbolism, spent 3 minutes on that, and then carried on a lot more comfortably with the French. I was startled when my phone rang. Oui, allô? Daniel ici. What? Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire? Quoi? I hadn't even thought about speaking in French. It had just poured out. Daniel? Alice's voice. Is that you? Yes, I replied. Why did you answer the phone like that? I was learning French. There was a long silence, and then I heard a snort. You're having me on. I shrugged. What did you want, Alice? Your brother was just here. I was surprised. He'd taken action far sooner than I'd expected. What did he say? He never said a word. He just stood there, his face so red I thought he was having a heart attack. Then he slapped Rhoda so hard she fell over and dragged her out of the room. Should I call the police? You sure you want to shine a light on that? I expect that would publicize your little secret, wouldn't it? Or did you really think that Alan's actions came out of the blue? He just woke up and decided to take out his dissatisfaction with life on Rhoda. The pause was even longer this time. What do you mean? She said finally. Come on, Alice. That's unworthy of you. You had to know the moment Alan appeared at a hotel miles away from where you were supposed to be that we'd learned all about your nasty little love weekends. There was the sound of a faint sob, and I could so clearly imagine her there, seated on the bed in her dressing gown. Her face would be pink, and her eyes red from crying. However, I felt little sympathy. Hell, for all I knew, she could be wearing a see-through satin chemise and be lying back comfortably with a glass of champagne and a huge smile. I'm sorry, she replied. I sighed heavily. Yeah, we're all sorry. And your apology and a $5 get us what? So what do we do now? She asked quietly after a long silence. We don't do anything. I will probably find somewhere else to live unless you want to move out and live with the syphilitic siblings. God, no, she stated emphatically. There seems to be a distinct lack of emotion from you about them. So it was just for the intimacy then? What, I didn't float your boat anymore? You were tired of Mr. Vanilla? Well, yes and no. What? Makes sense, I answered. I love you, and I love making love with you. But they are the complete opposite of you in every way, and that made it exciting. Ew, I said, despite appreciating her honesty. But I hadn't considered that she'd been having an affair with both of them. That had never crossed my mind. Both of them? Really? God, I'm even more disappointed in you. How did I not see this need in you to pander to your most base urges? What next? Are you going to go out and steal things, hurt children, torture animals, and murder people? Oh, come on, Daniel. I admit I cheated on you, but it was just intimacy. I don't deserve that. I'm not that bad. I think you are. Your selfish desires craved some unfamiliar attention, and you pandered to them. You happily went out and cheated, which is a primitive desire. It's the caveman part of your brain shouting, "I want it, so I will have it no matter what." Cheating, theft, rape, murder, they're all part of the primitive brain. That's why we don't do them, and created civilization to try and ensure that. It also means that the person who does those things hasn't evolved enough, doesn't have enough empathy to be civilized. Because the commonality in all those things is that when you allow yourself to do them, someone always gets hurt. The cost to the person doing it is often nothing because someone else always pays the price, in pain. And by your actions, you've shown that's who and what you are. I'm deeply disappointed in myself that I didn't recognize that. Oh, come on. That's ridiculous. I admitted I cheated on you, but I didn't try and kill you or steal from you or anything else, she replied. No, you just did the thing that would hurt me most. Worse, you deliberately planned it, carried it out, and even got me to pay for it, all the while knowing it would hurt me badly. I'm sorry, but I still don't see the difference. And if you think there is a lesser degree of pain in this situation that gives you salvation, then you're even further back down the path to that monkey brain than I thought. Alan, I never thought you would find out. I didn't set out to hurt you. I love you, she answered. You keep saying that, and perhaps you do, but you still did it happily and with malice aforethought. You never once tried to protect me from that cave woman you have in there. Actually, I'm probably denigrating Stone Age people by saying that. Monkey brain sounds better. Not to me, she said miserably. Nor me. I find myself married for the moment to a lesser evolved human-shaped being. Stop it. That's not fair. You're just trying to hurt me. It's a fight-or-flight reflex, Alice, I said conversationally. It's another part of that base brain, except this part tries to protect and survive when being attacked. I'm not attacking you. I never meant... How did you think I would react on discovering that you were off sharing low-life three-ways with your sister-in-law every 3 months, and amusingly getting me to pay in money and pain for the privilege of being humiliated? Or when I realized you were pointing me in one direction and then going in another to hide your lowest urges? Or when I understood you were buying junk from the same shop around the corner and pretending you dug it up in various places along your antiquing trips? Did you imagine I would carry on and ignore the whole thing? Or did you assume that I wouldn't care and might even be delighted that you were finally able to satisfy that arboreal primate within you? No matter how you look at it, you set out to attack me. I didn't. I didn't think any of those things. I thought you would never find out, so I never considered any of those questions. And it never crossed my mind that you were paying for my cheating. It was just part of our budget. How did you find out? And why are you talking like this? I've never heard you talk this way. Where is it coming from? She asked. An ordinary evolved mind, Alice. Your instincts took you back to a primitive base, and mine assisted me along to a better future. Now, knowing that, is there any reason you can think of why a primate and I should remain together? I can't see you staying with me as a pet. What if you devolved further? She was crying hard now. You're being so horrible, she sobbed. I wish you'd just slapped me as Alan did to Rhoda. I probably deserve that, but this is just cruel. Logic combined with that fight or flight. That's all. Any cruelty you feel is simply your reaction to my point of view. I'm sorry Alan hit Rhoda. I imagine both needed to reveal their pain and sorrow, him at her actions, and then her at his reaction. That's not my way. It was your way. You fought for me back in school. You fought for me and won me. It was exciting. So... Her words left me breathless for a moment. So, I had to continue fighting for you not to cheat? Is that it? Well, no. But it meant so much. It meant you loved me more than anything or anyone else. Then let me ask you this. Who did you fight for me? I asked. There was a long silence as she came to realize the untenable position in which she'd put herself. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry. She hung up. I didn't phone back. I guess I hadn't loved her as much as I thought I did. Perhaps being together for as long as we had just worn that golden shine down to a patina. Although I expect that happens with most couples. Either way, she wasn't special to me anymore. Just ordinary. Just a woman you would pass in the street without thought or consideration. So, in the end, despite the wailing and gnashing of teeth from Alice, and admittedly a few misgivings and thoughts of forgiveness from me, we headed to the divorce courts. I had thought of taking some sort of revenge on the Tosspots, but then realized how impossible it would be. They'd farmed all their lives, so physically, they were likely to be even stronger now than they'd been as teenagers, and I no longer owned a cricket bat. More importantly, a closer look on Google Maps revealed that their crops probably mainly consisted of dirt, and the farmhouse they shared with 2 wives and a horde of badly dressed ragtag kids looked more like the remnants of a gypsy camp than anything else. There was nothing I could do to them that could possibly make their lives any worse. I imagine that the quarterly visits to their village by my wife and sister-in-law were probably the brightest highlights in their whole miserable lives. Christmas, Easter, Guy Fawkes, and New Year all run together into 2 nights. Perhaps that's why the Morris dancers had turned out in celebration. Alika and I agreed amicably enough on splitting up the assets for the divorce, despite my absolute insistence that she kept all the crap she'd brought home from their antiquing, and she continued renting the house. I moved out and found my own place. Alan and Rhoda had a rough time for several years, but eventually settled down again after my brother had, and then regretted a 4-month-long affair of his own, making them equal in both their minds. I lost a few friends over the months before and after the divorce, but it wasn't for the reason I thought it was. It had nothing to do with my broken marriage. "I don't give a crap about your divorce," a mate of mine explained when I queried it with him. "She was cheating on you, and you divorced. It's not the first time it's happened in our circle, and I've learned not to take sides. No, the thing is, you've become a bit of a prick, a pretentious and arrogant prat. Whenever we get together, I have the feeling you look down on the rest of us, although you try and hide it. We went to school together ever since we started primary, and we both got the same education. So what's with the superior attitude and talking down at us, like you know so much more than the rest of us?" Homeschooling was the only answer I could give at the time. But thinking about what he'd said made me realize he was right. There was nothing wrong with him as a friend, but I had been treating him and the rest of the people we hung around with as less intelligent and almost uneducated. I had indeed become a complete and utter prick. Yet I couldn't change back to the person I'd been before the whole mess started. The happily stupid, unknowing, humiliated husband who just ran lightly over the surface of life, leaving hardly a ripple in my wake. I couldn't do it for them, and I wouldn't consider trying it for me. I refused to be that person anymore. My mind had been awakened and stretched, and I certainly wasn't going to give up the marvelous gift that Sean had given me, so I did the only thing that made sense. I left my old life behind. After starting on a very unsuccessful diet and simultaneously developing mild arthritis to get an ongoing repeat prescription for the 2 medications, I moved on. After a few months noodling around Britain, I moved further afield, ending up traveling the world and making a living in many countries as an English, history, or geography teacher. I would spend several hours on the laptop when I arrived, and afterwards usually managed the local languages pretty well. In Taiwan, I met and fell in love with a tiny university professor. She was a local, and her real name was Mei Ling, which means beautiful and delicate, and was entirely appropriate. However, most Taiwanese people have Anglo names as well, and Kitty was the name she habitually went by, which matched her nature perfectly. She was lovely to look at, but bristly and standoffish at first. However, after we got to know each other, she became playful and always affectionate and loved being rubbed and caressed while sitting on my knee or lying on top of me. Small enough for both of us to be perfectly comfortable. The rest of her preferences were all human, in the form of me, which was precisely how I felt about her, so we matched perfectly. After we married and moved to Australia, my nieces and nephews, individually or together, would come over and stay with us in Sydney whenever they could spare the time to take a holiday. Sean is delighted that I can talk to him on the same level about his astrophysics research and rocketry designs. However, we never discussed the pills, and I've never seen any rumors on the net. Perhaps those who know the secret also know they would be back to square one if everyone else knew as well. After all, who would stand out in a whole world full of Einsteins? And as for Alice, as lovely as it would be to imagine she pined away and died miserably without me. She finally met and married a farmer who wasn't a Talbot, raised a step-family, and is pretty happy with an ordinary life. Eventually, I apologized to her for cutting her down so sharply during that phone conversation. I assured her that she wasn't really a genetically deprived throwback or a base criminal, just a greedy, spiteful, and selfish person. Somehow she didn't see that as much of an apology, but I didn't feel the need to take it further. I've heard that she doesn't antique anymore, and every stick of furniture in her house is as brand new as they can afford. Memories aren't always sweet. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.